Russia tomorrow.
We're joined now by former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Good morning, Michael.
Hello, good morning.
Michael, you're part of an expert group on sanctions along with Andriy Yermak, head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. So your opinion on the subject holds a lot of weight. What are your thoughts on this letter in support of Russian business people?
Well, I haven't seen the letter itself. I've only read news reports about it. I think anybody who is helping to finance the war in Ukraine should be on the sanctions list. Mr. Friedman and Mr. Oven have big assets in Russia. They also have big assets outside of Russia, but they still have large assets that are taxable inside Russia. And so Europeans and Americans and others have made a decision that they should be on the sanctions list. And I 100% support that. I also think there should be a way to get off the sanctions list. That's a different question. But as to the question of whether they should be lifted, I disagree with that. There's a reason why they're on that sanctions list, because their money is directly funding the killing of Ukrainians inside Ukraine. And there needs to be some responsibility for that. And that's why they're on the sanctions list.
To what extent do you buy this narrative regarding conflict among the elites, where it's suggested that there is a disagreement among the most influential people in Putin's inner circle?
So I am not optimistic at all that you sanction the oligarchs, and then the oligarchs get mad, and then they go to Putin and they say to Putin, stop your war because I'm on the sanctions list. That's an argument you hear in the West oftentimes, right? And people who make that argument simply don't understand that the oligarchs we're talking about, people like Oven and Friedman, have zero power to change Putin's decision-making. I want to emphasize that. They have zero power. Mr. Putin, in my opinion, is probably happy that Friedman and Oven are on the sanctions list. He could care less about them. That's not the issue. The issue is, how do you reduce Putin's financial support for his war? So you're not trying to get the oligarchs to change Putin's mind. I think that's naive that it would happen that way. Rather, you are trying to reduce the financial support to the Russian government so that he has fewer resources to fund his war machine in Ukraine. And that's why I think it's important that all, in my opinion, all major companies in Russia should be sanctioned. The sanctions list should be radically expanded. There are many oligarchs and many companies that are not on the list today, and I don't understand that. I think they should all be on the list to reduce the financial support for Vladimir Putin's government so that they have fewer rubles and dollars to spend on their soldiers in Ukraine.
I saw a recent tweet of yours where you said that sanctions should be introduced not once a year or once a month or even weekly, but every day. Who are the oligarchs that you feel haven't been properly sanctioned yet? Are there any specific names you'd like to highlight?
Well, first, let me explain the concept, because I think it's really important. And let me use an analogy. I teach here at Stanford University. It's very hard to find parking here on campus. If you park in an illegal place here on campus, you get a ticket for that day. And it's a high one, by the way, $50, $70. If you leave your car there, you get a second ticket the second day. And if you leave it there a third day, you get a third ticket. You don't just get one ticket for the first time that you violate the law. You get a ticket every single day. That's the way sanctions should be. Every day that the Russians are occupying Ukrainian territory and soldiers are killing Ukrainians, the price of that should go up. And I think the West has made a mistake where they just respond once and then just leave those sanctions in place and don't do anything more. Just a few days ago, there was a major attack across all of Ukraine. These Kinzhal weapons, right? These missiles were used all over the place. There should have been new sanctions after that. And that, I think, conceptually needs to be changed. Now, you asked another question. Well, who to sanction? And let's start with individual sanctions, but there are many other
Mhm.
things that could be done as well. I think there are tens of thousands of Russians that can be sanctioned. If you're a member of United Russia, you should be sanctioned. If you're a member of a board of directors of a Russian company that is paying taxes to Putin, you should be sanctioned. If you're a government official at any level within the Russian government, you should be sanctioned. And this is another conceptual change that I think would be important.
Mhm.
We need to begin to sanction positions, not individuals. So that if you, and that gives people choices. If you sanction everybody that is in Mr. Putin's party, United Russia, and you say if you join that party, you will be on the Western sanctions list, or if you are in that party, you will be on the sanctions list, then that gives that individual in Russia a choice. They can resign from United Russia. They can resign from the board of directors of some company to avoid sanctions. So I think sanctioning positions rather than individuals is also something new that the West should consider.
Майкл, есть проблема с отсутствием механизма
Michael, there
регулярных
seems to
событий
be
по
an
поводу
issue
санкций.
where there is no
Точнее,
way of
есть
being released from the
проблема
sanctions.
отсутствия
Do you think
механизма
that there
выхода из-под
needs to be
санкций.
a procedure for
Считаете вы, что
sanctions to be
такой
lifted?
механизм
And
нужен?
are there any Russian
И
oligarchs
считаете ли
that
вы,
are
что
currently
кто-то из
being
тех
sanctioned
российских
that you
олигархов
think
или
deserve a way
если вы
out?
хотите,
Well, first, I believe that the sanctions do have some flaws in a couple of respects. The worst, the worst flaw is that Russians who oppose the war and who have fled the country and are trying to find a way to live abroad have been swept up in general sanctions. So they can't use their credit cards. They can't access their money, and that I think is the first and most important part of the sanctions regime that needs to be corrected. It's very difficult, for instance, to get a visa to come to my country, the United States. I know of dozens, maybe hundreds of people that I know are human rights activists. I know they're independent journalists that oppose the war, and yet they cannot relocate to the United States. So that's an instance of the sanctions regime where it needs to be corrected. There has to be a way for governments in the West to discriminate between those that should be sanctioned, those that shouldn't receive visas, and those Russian citizens that should not be sanctioned by having their bank accounts blocked or by not being allowed to receive work visas. That's the first most important thing. Second, with regard to billionaires that are on the sanctions list, I believe there should be a mechanism to get off the list. And I want to emphasize this is my personal opinion that is not shared by many people in the working group that I coordinate. So I want to emphasize one more time it is my personal position, it is not an official position of our working group. I think there should be some conditions to get off the list. And here are my three conditions that I would recommend. Number one, those individuals have to denounce Putin and his war. None of this abstract thing that they're against conflict. Personally denounce Putin and his war. Number two, they should give 90% of their wealth to a Ukrainian reconstruction fund. And I emphasize 90%, not $1 billion, the vast majority of their wealth, because the vast majority of their wealth was made under Putin's illegal, horrific, barbaric regime. That is not their money. They have made that money in ways that they need to give that money to reconstruct Ukraine. And third, nobody should be allowed to do this deal until the Ukrainian government has decided that they are not directly involved in supporting crimes against humanity inside Ukraine. So those are my conditions. Nobody supports my conditions. I want to be clear about that. But I think eventually that would be a mechanism by which you could consider removing people from the sanctions list.
Последний уточняющий
One
вопрос.
final
Обращались ли
clarifying
к вам,
question. Have there been any
представители
representatives
российской
of the Russian business elite
за помощью,
that have reached out to
чтобы
you
вы
to ask for help with getting
содействовали
sanctions against them
этому снятию
lifted?
санкций?
Yes, they have. And yes, I have not helped them. But you raise an important question. One last thing I wanted to say about what the scandal between Mr. Volkov and Mr. Venediktov. Without getting into the details, I have to tell you, it really is dispiriting for me. Grusna. It's very sad for me to watch this kind of fighting because there's one enemy. His name is Vladimir Putin and those that support him. Everybody in the world should be focused like a laser on what they can do to stop Putin's barbaric war inside Ukraine. And when Russians and Ukrainians, or Americans and Ukrainians and Russians and Georgians fight amongst ourselves and criticize each other, what we are doing is we are helping Putin. I want to emphasize that. We are helping Putin when we destroy each other. And that, to me, is not very strategic. And I would just call on people to stop fighting among each other. Stop fighting among people that you know are committed to the same cause, because when you do that, you help one person, Vladimir Putin.
That
was Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia. Thank you for the insight and clear responses on the issue of Western sanctions policy.
We operated in Russia for 12 years, and the government tried to get rid of us 3 times. They got us on the 6th day of the war in Ukraine.
Мы временно приостанавливаем работу телеканала.
We left Russia, but we kept going. We have now decided to tell the truth about Russia, the war, and Russian society in English as well.
Kherson is Putin's 3rd major defeat in a row.
What is wrong with the Russian army?
Stories no one else can tell you. Hear it right from the source. Subscribe to our channel.